Good evening. So what we do is we go back to a very different thing altogether, which is called as Aurangzeb. Now I don't know how do I put this and what do I manage to do with it and everything. The reason for this session is because the Frontline carries this piece by Ziaul Salam on why is Aurangzeb being talked about now. आणि essentially त्याच्या centerला जर काही असेल तर it's this book which is called as Aurangzeb, which is done by Audrey Trotsky, आणि ज्याचं subtitle जे आहे is The Man and the Myth. I don't know how many of you have managed to go through it, आणि how many of you have seen it ever in your lives or something like that. It's a very small book. It's 190 pages. की ज्याच्यातले जवळजवळ almost एक शेवटची 20 पानं जी आहेत runs into a large bibliographical essay, which is giving you a detailed bibliography of everything that has been worked on Aurangzeb till date and of every single thing that has been written in terms of articles, papers, books, every single thing. So she does an interesting job for you. My only problem with the book is it has a very simple language. Itna simple language, itna simple. And for a book which has been done by someone who is purportedly writing a historical biography, it's written in a form which is unbelievably simplistic. It has no footnotes, it has a whole range of endnotes, but they're mostly bibliographical. So footnotes कुछ नहीं है जो एक नॉर्मल हिस्ट्री का किताब पढ़ते वक्त आता नॉर्मल हिस्ट्रीचं पुस्तक कशाला म्हणायचं इथपासून प्रॉब्लेम आहे. कारण आपल्याकडं बमो पुरंदरे छाप पुस्तकांना देखील इतिहासाची पुस्तकं म्हणायची प्रथा आहे. त्याच्यामुळे त्या पुस्तकांमध्ये बमो पुरंदरे इज नॉट अ हिस्टॉरियन. लेट मी फर्स्ट मेक दॅट पॉइंट क्लिअर की बमो पुरंदरे जे काय असेल ते असेल पण ही इज नॉट अन हिस्टॉरियन. ओके, सो जे एक नॉर्मल हिस्ट्री के टेक्स्ट में आते रहता है. आई डोंट नो हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू हैव सीन जॉन एफ रिचर्ड्स का मुगल्स बाय केम्ब्रिज यूनिवर्सिटी प्रेस, किंवा there is a very short biography of Aurangzeb which was once upon a time done by Jadunath Sarkar, which was based on all the 5 volumes that he had written. And Sarkar ka Aurangzeb, surprise of surprises, appeared in 1947. So the same year in which India was going free, Sarkar finally culminates the last volume of that 5-volume huge series. Sarkar abhi bhi is some sort of an authority in Aurangzeb. Matlab nobody has worked to the extent to which Sarkar has worked, by gaining access to what are called as original sources and reading it in the way in which Sarkar has gone about reading it. Of course, there's a big problem with all of that, and I'll come back to that also. So, त्या अर्थाने ती जी पुस्तकं आहेत ती ज्या फॉर्मॅटमध्ये लिहिली गेलेली आहेत त्याच्या कंपॅरिझनमध्ये हे इतकं साधारण सिंपल पुस्तक आहे की एकही शब्द ह्याच्यामध्ये असा नाही आहे की जो कॉम्प्लिकेटेड आहे, जो फिरवला गेलेला आहे किंवा जो समजून घेण्यासाठी तुम्हाला कष्ट करायला लागतात. Everything is so straightforward. It's almost like you're reading a storybook. And at no point of time, they normally जसं हिस्ट्रीच्या पुस्तकांमध्ये करतात की they keep on moving back and forth in time, they keep on moving back and forth in space. ती काहीही करत नाही त्याच्यातलं. She gives you a straight chronology from the point at which he was born to the point at which he died. आणि she starts this off on a very interesting note. And permit me to read one small portion of it, so that it should sort of make this point clear कि आपण exactly काय करतोय. Why is Zia writing the sort of stuff that Zia is writing? Why is Audrey writing the sort of stuff that she is writing? And where are we finally placed on this entire issue? And this is right, the first paragraph of the entire text. This book began with a Twitter message asking if I wanted to write an accessible biography of one of the Mughal kings. The discussion quickly migrated to email, and I settled on Aurangzeb Alamgir as the subject. That this book was first formulated via social media is appropriate because the Aurangzeb fever that has gripped modern India often surfaces more virulently on platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. I don't know, matlab everything that is on Twitter and Facebook as far as Indians are concerned is virulent. So there's no specific reason why you should figure out, it's only Aurangzeb that is followed violently on Twitter and Facebook. Everything is followed violently. In this short biography, I address Aurangzeb's vibrant, ongoing presence in popular culture. From a historian's point of view, however, Aurangzeb is first and foremost a Mughal king, about whom most people know lamentably little. This book is an attempt to introduce the historical Aurangzeb in all its complexity to a wide readership. Okay, so this is the reason why Madam started writing it. Of course, there have been a whole range of Mughals who have been written about in recent times. For a long time, Nasir Namdaran's Shahenshah was available only in Marathi. This year, that's 2016, I'm sorry, not 2017. It also becomes accessible to an English-speaking audience through an English translation of Shahenshah, which has been published by Speaking Tiger. So if you look at a whole range, but there's somehow or the other a sort of interest in something called as Aurangzeb. Most of the time, the interest is about trying to prove that he was a wrong sort of king. Okay, the wrong sort of Muslim, the wrong sort of Indian, the wrong sort of king, the wrong sort of everything. So he's sort of used as a metaphor to point this out as to what is wrong with us and how should you go about setting it right. And it is very simple to set it right. So all that you have got to do is you have got to forget him. All that you have got to do is you need not engage him. All that you have got to do is change names wherever he occurs. So त्याचा काही फार विचार करायचा नाही. He was dead 300 years ago. The India that he was born in, lived through and died in is already gone. Long time ago it is gone. So you need not be worried about all of that. All that you need to do is go about changing a couple of places. So Aurangabad can become Sambhajinagar, Aurangzeb Road can be changed into Abdul Kalam Road. So you do all of that and everything sets right. You can easily overlook him. You don't need to be worried about him. So the best thing that you can do is you overlook him. So don't get engaged with him, don't speak to him, don't let him speak to you. So just overlook him and things fall into place. If at all you want to get engaged with him, then the only right way of doing it is the sort of thing that Rajnath Singh was yesterday speaking in Parliament. You disown somebody, you become a better Indian. So जैसे वो लड़के के बाप ने उसको डिसोन किया, saying कि I'm not going to bury him, I'm not going to perform the last rituals for him. The Indian nation feels proud of you. So all that you need to do is you need to disown someone. And you need to disown someone in a certain perspective. So someone that the Indian nation and its high priest consider as wrong, once you have disowned him or her, the matter is set right. And after that we can move on as what is called as good and better Indians. So it's as simple as that. Okay. तरी पण प्रॉब्लेम असा आहे की जर हे एवढं सोपं आहे तर मग लोक एवढा जीवाला त्रास करून का घेतात. इतना तो सिंपल है. ही इज डेड, ही इज गॉन. मुघल फॅमिली मधलं कुणी पण इज नॉट स्टँडिंग फॉर एनी इलेक्शन एनीवेअर. दे आर नॉट इवन केपेबल ऑफ डुईंग दॅट. The last remnants of the family are engaged in petty activities in terms of earning a livelihood. ते कोणी कुठं टांगा चालवतं, ती जी सून आहे फ्रॉम वन ऑफ द ब्रांचेस, शी रन्स अ टी स्टॉल इन कॅलकटा. सो दे आर लाइक pathetic people. For people who once upon a time owned a huge empire, Aurangzeb was the last big Indian empire. So nothing as big as that before you enter into the modern period. And somehow or the other he falls a prey to it, in the sense that throughout his life he keeps on expanding it as the earlier three generations did westwards, and fails miserably in it. So for a long period of time the Mughals were obsessed with something called as regaining access to the ancestral homeland. So there was this idea that we should be capturing northern Afghanistan, and through that we should be opening up the ways which will lead us to Central Asia. आणि याच्यामध्ये 3 पिढ्यांनी सगळ्या प्रकारचे पैसे लावून झाले, सगळ्या प्रकारचं मॅनपॉवर वापरून झालं, आणि तिन्ही पिढ्यांच्या नशिबी सगळ्या प्रकारचं नुकसान ह्याच्या पलीकडे काही आलेलं नाही. आणि तरी देखील तिन्ही पिढ्या आर ऑब्सेस्ड विथ दिस, दॅट व्हॉट वी हॅव गॉट टू डू इज वी हॅव गॉट टू गेन ॲक्सेस टू द ancestral homeland. सो जहां से हम आए थे, these regions in the Fargana Valley, we should regain access to that. आता करायचं काय होतं तसं करून हे कुणालाच माहित नाही, पण असतं म्हणजे प्रत्येकाला इच्छा असते गावाला परत जायची, तर तसं होतं, पण काय जाता आलेलं नाही, कधीच जाता आलेलं नाही. ओके. सो even Aurangzeb spends time expanding it northwestwards, westwards, and fails miserably in it. Aurangzeb spends time expanding it eastwards towards Assam, Burma, and fails again miserably in it. So he fails very badly in this battle of Saraighat, which that sort of opens up a very interesting thing, and just let me place it on record and then we'll further develop it. In each of these cases where an Aurangzeb fails, be it Assam, be it the Deccan, the fact that he has failed in subsequent history would become the source of something called as sub-regional nationalism. Be it for the Assamese, be it for the Marathas, be it for the Deccanese, one strong place where you locate your concerns as Marathas, as Assamese, as Kannadigas, is this idea that Aurangzeb failed in subduing us. He might have captured us momentarily, but he failed in terms of retaining this, he failed in terms of expanding it, he failed in terms of holding on to it. And that's the reason why he has miserably failed. Okay? And then he tries to get into the Deccan, and finally the Deccan would be the place where it would be sort of his finest hour, and it would be the sort of his last hour. So 1681 May he'll come down into the Deccan, stay here till 1707, and after being dead and gone, he would be buried in the Deccan. Tyarthani, with his death and his burial in the Deccan, Aurangzeb almost sets the seal on something which says that the Mughal emperors can now, after having had been buried in a place like the Deccan, not claim any ancestry anywhere else on the face of this earth except for something called as India. So your careers and your ambitions in terms of looking northwestwards, looking westwards, are all dead and gone. Now you become what is called as blue-blooded, as purely Indian as is possible. There is just no way by which this can be taken a look at. And of course, most of the time he is failing for a simple reason, because he is dealing with modes of communication which are extremely primitive. As compared to 1707 में वो मरता है, finds it difficult to hold and retain on to the Deccan. 1857, that's barely 150 years after this, the British would manage to capture almost all of South Asia. And the reason why they would be in a position to do that, and the reason why they would succeed in terms of consolidating that conquest, besides a whole host of other commercial reasons, but one of the reasons why the British succeeded phenomenally was on account of this flowering of a pan-India trading network. Something which in Aurangzeb's last days becomes impossible and never is recovered after that for any substantive reason. Okay? And B is the coming in of something called as the railways. So there's something that built you, that gave you an all-India empire as far as the British are concerned, is something called as the railways. कि जो बेचारे के पास नहीं है, रेलवे कुछ भी नहीं है. You have got to move wherever you are moving on the fastest moving horses, and जितना horse का speed है, उतना ही आपका imperial communication और consolidation का speed है. आप उससे ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं कर सकते. Okay, so the most important thing that one has got to take note of through something called as ordering, through something called a whole range of people who are writing on this, is you're essentially talking about a primitive world, a pre-modern world. दुनिया वैसा नहीं था जैसा आप सोच रहे हो. हाँ, with the death of Aurangzeb, a whole range of possibilities will open up. There's no doubt about that. And one of the most sizable possibilities would be in the realm of something called as European colonialism, which will go about shaping up things, which will go about changing up things, which will go about doing everything to us. What we have got to figure out is, how does one make sense of the world in which he lived, and is there any relationship between the world in which we are? And my simple, humble submission, irrespective of what the Mahesh Sharmas of the world think, is there's no resemblance. It's a completely different world. तुम्ही कुठल्याही अँगलने विचार करा, तुम्ही कसल्याही पद्धतीने विचार करा, you can never go back to it, and you can never think about yourselves in terms of that. Because there is no straight sort of a linking between what you are and what they were. It just doesn't operate that way. You have got to understand something very simple and very important. Colonialism, in a way, positions a rupture between the pre-Indian world in so strong a manner that irrespective of तुम कितना भी गालियां किसी को दो, कोई भी यहाँ पे औरंगजेब की औलाद नहीं है. मतलब आप कोशिश कर सकते हो, and कोशिश करने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. Anyone does that, and everyone should do it. So this whole idea of बाबर की औलाद है, औरंगजेब की औलाद है, that's fine. As some sort of pejorative, as some sort of defamation, that's fine. But it doesn't work. कोई भी नहीं है. And that's the most important thing that has to be understood, that you are essentially talking of a feudal court, a feudal culture, a feudal country which is much different from the one in which we are living. मग तरी पण मुद्दा तो उरतोच की मग असा असताना असा प्रयत्न का केला जातो he will link up everything with Aurangzeb. Why do we time and again try doing that? The one simple reason is, once you pick up on Aurangzeb and make that simplistic sort of black and white division, Aurangzeb, bad Muslim, bad king, bad Indian, and everybody else who fought against him, good Indians, good people, business becomes very simple. फार कष्ट करायला लागत नाही, फार डोक्याला त्रास करून घ्यायला लागत नाही. एकदा का आपण असं म्हटलं ना की हे चांगलं आहे, हे वाईट आहे आणि हा पंक्ती प्रपंच अशा पद्धतीने ऑपरेट होतो म्हटल्यानंतर काहीच एक्सप्लेन करायला लागत नाही. As she would say, now in addition to this text which I have gone through, there are a whole range of other things which I was looking up since I was interested in doing this. There's this text which is called the Mathare Alamgiri, which was done by one of Aurangzeb's courtiers called as Mustad Khan at the end of his regime. And Mustad Khan presents this as a text to Bahadur Shah the First, जो औरंगजेब के बाद राजा बनेगा और जो 5 साल के लिए राज करेगा. So he presents this to him in terms of how should an ideal king be. Okay, so this is very interesting. Now there are a whole range of very interesting works which are happening, and I'll just place even that into context. One of the earliest biographies of Aurangzeb which was attempted way back in the early 19th century by a man called as Mountstuart Elphinstone, who was also the governor of the conquered Peshwa's territories in the Deccan. Mountstuart collected a huge amount of information and desired writing a biography which he unfortunately never wrote. But if you look at the sort of material which he collected about it, if you look at the sort of jottings that he had about it, what Mountstuart is interestingly trying to do, and what you have always got to remember, that Mountstuart 1819 to 1827 is governor of the Bombay Presidency. He is governor of all these territories which have been captured from the Peshwa and which have been made a part of the company's territories in India. He is the first one who attempts a very serious work in terms of who exactly was Aurangzeb and why was he important. And of course, Mountstuart is looking at him from the Deccani political perspective. कि Mountstuart's permanent interest जो आहे तो is in terms of understanding as to how did the Deccan coagulate and coalesce into a single political unit and what role did Aurangzeb play in it. Okay, for a long time this work remained out of print, was never printed. It's only recently, if I'm not wrong, somewhere around 2004-2005, you had the Oxford University Press ka Karachi branch publishing it once again. And it's now available to you. It's of course a very small short book, but it's a very interesting book in terms of why are you talking about Aurangzeb? And he's talking about Aurangzeb almost immediately after the Peshwa is gone, almost immediately after the company has acquired these territories and is trying to rule it. At no point of time is an interest in Aurangzeb in the modern period bereft of what is called as the politics of colonialism. So at every point of time, Aurangzeb has been perspectivized on, thought about and taken note of from the perspective of something that is called as English colonialism in India. And that's something that will always have to be well kept in mind कि exactly game किस तरह से खेला जा रहा है. Okay. Then you have a whole range of works which have been done. Most important of one, which were what were called as the English translations. So you have the Persian chronicles there. Now the Mughals and the sultans before them, the Delhi sultans before them, start off this whole process of what is called as chronicling every single event that is happening at court. At times you have multiple chronicles for the same king. At times you will have a singular chronicle. Most of the chronicles, given the fact that they are created for the state and are created by the monies of the state, by people who are employees of the state, are extremely laudatory in nature as far as the king is concerned. So तुम्हाला एकही chronicle अशी सापडणार नाही की जी कुठल्याही पॉइंटला असं म्हणायचा प्रयत्न करते की the king was wrong. So every chronicle sort of keeps on talking about this, that it sort of keeps on rationalizing and justifying the king's actions. And they are doing that for a simple reason, क्योंकि राजा के पैसे से आया है, राजा के आप एम्प्लॉइज हो, तो ऐसी सिचुएशन में आप राजा के खिलाफ नहीं लिख सकते हो. ओके, तो हर एक क्रॉनिकल को जब आप लिख रहे हो तो उस वक्त आपका जो एक पोजिशनिंग है, आपका जो एक दिमाग है, इज वर्किंग इन अ मैनर टू सी टू इट दैट यू पेंट द किंग इन द ब्राइटेस्ट ऑफ द लाइट्स. 200 years down the line, 300 years down the line, when the British are translating the chronicles, you have got to remember कि उस ट्रांसलेशन का अपना एक अलग पॉलिटिक्स है, और वो पॉलिटिक्स tries to play on a literalist meaning of the terms with an idea to prove that India before the British conquest was a horrible place, a simply horrible place, with everyone engaged in a fight against each other, and it's only the British rule in India, something called as Pax Britannica, which is capable of establishing peace and justice between the communities. So अगर हम लोग यहाँ पे नहीं आए होते, हम लोगों ने जो किया वो नहीं किया होता, तो ये लोग एक दूसरे के खिलाफ इसी तरह से मरते लड़ते और मर जाते. So हमने जो किया है वो एक पॉजिटिव किस्म की चीज है इन लोगों के लिए, is the sense that the British chroniclers have. But what they funnily enough go about doing, as far as those English translations are concerned, they're picking up on words literally. There's no effort made to explain कि in terms के मायने क्या है. Okay, there's no effort made to explain how do you read these terms in context. Of course, you also have got to remember that they have a huge number of works to work on. So something like the Eliot and Dawson histories of India as told by its historians runs into something like 17 to 18 volumes all by itself. So if you look at most of those works, what's been played upon is an idea that Indians before the Europeans stepped on the scene, most importantly the British stepped on the scene, was a fractious place, endlessly quibbling between each other, and had it not been for us, this could never have been stabilized. Post 19th century वाला जो Indian historiography है, इसका classical example is Trushki talks of how is Aurangzeb seen in Nehru's discovery of India. Nehru is the secularist par excellence. Nehru is the sort of best person in terms of an epitome of the Indian nation par excellence. How does Nehru look upon all of this? Nehru calls him an austere bigot, someone who is very Puritan, someone who is responsible for the ruination of the Mughal Empire, and Nehru identifies this only into something called as Aurangzeb's orthodox religious policies. औरंगजेब की जो रिलीजियस पॉलिसीज थी, उन रिलीजियस पॉलिसीज की वजह से एम्पायर का नुकसान हुआ है, इतना भारी नुकसान हुआ है, इतना असीमित किस्म का नुकसान हुआ है कि the empire could never find its foot again. This from a person who himself at a point of time has been seen as a Babur ki aulad. So at some point of time in the 1990s, Nehru himself has been seen as a Babur ki aulad. Nehru himself has been seen as someone who is the carrier of some sort of a Muslim blood in his lineage. I'm not talking of Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi wala or Feroz Khan wala kissa to completely alag. So Facebook has this wonderful discovery that Indira Gandhi was not married to anyone called as Feroz Gandhi. She was actually married to someone called as Feroz Khan. And this is not the hero Feroz Khan. So we're not talking of film personality called as Feroz Khan. We're talking of a completely different individual. Perhaps Facebook अशा पद्धतीने शब्द कमी पडतात. म्हणजे कालपासून तर लोकांना उत्तर प्रदेशमध्ये कदाचित 600 सीट आहेत असेंब्लीमध्ये असंच वाटायला लागलं. The BJP is winning 300 seats. I thought Uttar Pradesh Assembly possibly has 600 seats in it. But so, anyway, that's a different story. For anyone who feels that Mrs. Gandhi was married to someone called as Feroz Khan, there's an excellent biography of Feroz Gandhi that has now been done by someone who persistently followed him for almost 40 years and possibly even today doesn't feel that the entire story is out. So there's a whole range of documentation which he has done, which he hasn't managed to put it into this book. Possibly आगे जाके कभी तो भी वो publish होगा. But there's this title called as Other Gandhi, which has been done by this European journalist. So if anyone is interested, please take a look at it and know this for sure, that Mrs. Gandhi was not married to anyone called as Feroz Khan, but was married to somebody called as Feroz Gandhi. But anyway, that is not the bulk of our argument today. The point is, for someone who was himself seen as a Babur ki aulad, this is a very interesting turn of events that Mr. Nehru sees Aurangzeb as someone who ruined the Mughal Empire on account of his religious policies. Of course, discovery of India is not a serious work of history. It's basically a certain sort of reminiscing about the Indian past in the time that you're spending in a colonial jail. So it has a different set of exigencies which is acting upon it. But this characterization is very interesting. And it would sort of set the tone. The right Mughals are Akbar, Dara. The wrong ones are Babur, Aurangzeb. There's something called as the right and the wrong. और दारा तर मतलब जितना वो उसकी जिंदगी में पॉपुलर नहीं था उतना वो उसकी मौत के 300 साल के बाद पॉपुलर है. दारा इज सो पॉपुलर कि had Dara been alive now तो he himself would have been amazed कि ऐसा मैंने क्या किया कि जिसके लिए so popular. Roads are being named after him, institutes are being established in his name. Everything is being done to project कि Dara is the right sort of individual, and he's the right sort of individual कि जिसका standard is contrasting it with Aurangzeb to prove that Aurangzeb is wrong. मैं दारा काय काय करतो तर दारा हा प्युरिटनिकल मुस्लिम नाहीये. टू एन एक्सटेंट दैट पीपल हैव ऑलमोस्ट लॉस्ट सेंस ऑफ दिस, पीपल सॉर्ट ऑफ पोर्ट्रे औरंगजेब एज सम सॉर्ट ऑफ प्रीकर्सर ऑफ ओसामा बिन लादेन. ऑस्टेर, सलाफी, वहाबी, ये आप देखो किसी भी एंगल से नहीं लगता है, किसी भी नहीं, except for ही ती काठी सारखी वाटू शकते, पण what bin Laden carried was a stick, what the man is carrying is a sword. Okay, ostentatious, एकदम regal. मैं अपन गरीब हो तो गरीब नव्हता अशातला भाग नाहीये. औरंगजेब died as a phenomenally rich man with the Kohinoor intact in the treasury. Okay, but in his private life was extremely poor, very austere. Most of the time kept away from all manner of state ostentation after the two coronations were done in 1659. So by the time the two coronations are over, uske baad there is no known event where Aurangzeb went about splurging money or displayed any sort of ostentation. May they keeps on writing the Quran, keeps on sewing those caps, सगळं घेऊन दरबारात येणार, तिथं मांडून बसणार आणि त्यांच्याकडनं पैसे मागणार. आता हाऊ डेअर दे आर गोइंग टू पे हिम लेस फॉर दॅट. म्हणजे असं कोणीच नाही करू शकत ना की नाही ते टोपीची किंमत आहो त्याची किती किंमत असू शकते, पण तुम्हाला पैसे द्यायलाच लागतात, कारण ॲट द एंड ऑफ द डे दॅट हॅज बीन डन बाय द एम्परर. यू स्टँडिंग इन फ्रंट ऑफ हिम इन भरा दरबार, युअर पोझिशन्स डिपेंड ऑन इट. यू कॅन से दिस दॅट की असून असून याची किंमत किती असते, 40 रुपयाची गोष्ट. सो फॉर ऑल दॅट ऑस्टेंटेशन man got a huge amount of money, no doubt about it. Conducted his household out of it. Had maintained that very strict sort of demarcation between something called as the public monies and something called as money used for private consumption. And had to do that for a simple reason, because you have become king at a point of time where all possibilities of augmenting your revenues are almost nil on account of the fact that you are living in a period of प्रोडक्टिविटी की जो बहुत ही अलग किस्म का है. दरबार जिस तरह से एक्सपैंड हो चुका है उसमें ये पॉसिबिलिटी गुंजाइश ही नहीं है कि आप एक बहुत बड़े स्केल पे जी सकते हो जैसे फॉर फादर्स लिव्ड. इट्स जस्ट नॉट पॉसिबल. यू हैव रीच्ड ऑलमोस्ट द जेनिथ ऑफ वॉट एवर यू कुड कीप ऑन एक्सपैंडिंग. अच्छा, द मुगल बिजनेस वर्कड ऑन वॉट इज नोन एज अ मनसबदारी. So the king has one portion of the lands which are in and around the Delhi Agra area, जो राजा का अपना पर्सनल इनकम का एरिया है. The king maintains a strong army of something like 40-50,000. नंबर्स तो इतने प्रॉब्लेमॅटिक है की तुम्ही जर ते सगळे आकडे एकंदरीत त्याचा अंदाज घेऊन बघितला. He ruled India which extended from the Khyber to Bengal and from Kashmir all the way to the Doaba areas in southern peninsular India. सगळ्याची मिळून पॉप्युलेशन मुश्किल से 15 कोटी आहे. मुश्किल से 15 कोटी लोकसंख्या असलेल्या राज्यावरती आम्ही राज्य करतो. इट्स अन एक्सटेन्सिव्ह एम्पायर बट अ स्मॉल पॉप्युलेशन. 15 कोटी इज हार्डली एनीथिंग. उत्तर प्रदेश 20 करोड़ का है. पूरा द एंटायर एम्पायर दैट औरंगजेब रूल्ड ओवर वाज मुश्किल से 15 करोड़. गिव यू सम पर्सपेक्टिव. उत्तर प्रदेश 20 करोड़ का है, महाराष्ट्र 12 करोड़ पे है. You can imagine what is it that we are exactly referring to and talking about. It's very difficult to carry on with things in this manner. In a way, this is the last major expansion that you're going to witness in terms of the reach of the state as far as revenues themselves are concerned. So one of the reasons why he's deeply interested in the Deccan is because that will open up new trade routes and will bring him resources like the Golconda diamond mines. So आपल्याला डीप इंटरेस्ट डेक्कनमध्ये तेवढ्या एकाच गोष्टीसाठी आहे की कमीत कमी आपल्याला एक असा इंडिपेंडेंट सोर्स ऑफ रेव्हेन्यू प्राप्त करता येईल की ज्याच्यामध्ये यू वोंट बी डिपेंडेंट ऑन व्हॉट आर कॉल्ड एज द लँड टॅक्सेस गैदर्ड अप इन द नॉर्थ. सो वन इज अ पोर्शन ऑफ द एम्पायर कि जिससे आने वाला सीधा पैसा ट्रेजरी में जाता है और राजा इसको खुद पे खर्च करता है, अपने निजी परिवार पे खर्च करता है और अपनी खुद की जो आर्मीज है उस पे खर्च करता है. एवरीथिंग एल्स इज गिवन ऑफ एज मनसब्स. सो यू आर पार्सलिंग एवरीथिंग ऑफ एज मनसब्स एंड जागीर्स, and as far as these mansabs and jagirs are concerned, all revenue out of it except for what is made over as ceremonial tribute stays with the mansabdars, and everyone wants to be a mansabdar. Everyone. मुघल मनसबदार सारखा पोझिशन नाही, मुघल मनसबदार सारखी लेजिटिमसी नाही. त्यामुळे आम्ही रायगडवरून आग्र्याला गेलो कशाला होतो? आपल्याला मनसबदारी पाहिजे होती. This whole idea that we were negotiating Swaraj and all of that, very funny, but doesn't hold true. You just go through the bibliographical essay to realize as to what are we talking about, and you just find out कि याच्यातल्या किती concerns have been addressed as far as Maharashtrian history is concerned, at least of the same 16th and 17th centuries. You have phenomenal works done on Mughal painting. One of the reasons why people like Turchki would come in is this. This book has an excellent collection of these Mughal miniatures. She belongs to that tribe of historians. Of course, Turchki, to be true, is what is known as a scholar in comparative religions, but trained almost like a historian. But one of the major concerns as far as these Western academies and historians are concerned, as of now, is something called as Mughal painting, Mughal architecture, all manner of Mughal arts. There are phenomenal exhibitions which are held all over the place, which go about collecting all these pieces, use this to in a certain way understand the period. की ह्याच्यातलं प्रत्येक चित्र जे आहे would almost be turned into brilliant monographs in terms of how do you understand these pictures. ये जो दिखाया जा रहा है ये exactly क्या है, किस किस्म का पोजिशनिंग है ये. आता what you have to remember is these pictures were never meant for any flex propaganda purposes. So हे आग्र्यामध्ये कुठेही रस्त्यावरती बांधले जाणार नाहीये. They are going to be this is going to be a part of the Mughal state collection. It's going to stay with the state, and at the end of the day it would be taken away by the British to different museums in India and different museums outside India. सो त्या अर्थाने हे काय वाइडर पब्लिसिटीसाठी वापरलं जात नाहीये. मग यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि इस किस्म के आर्ट का एग्जैक्ट पर्पस क्या है. You have Catherine Brown doing a brilliant study on did Aurangzeb really ban music when it is said that he banned music? Or what was it that was actually banned in the court? You have people working on Mughal cuisines and food. You have phenomenal works being done on Mughal military technologies in terms of how did they get their weapons done? What were the technologies being used for it? Where was the metal and the material required for it gathered from? You have individual notables of the Mughal court in terms of its courtiers being turned into brilliant biographies now. So last year you had this text coming out from the University of California Press on this Mughal secretary during the Aurangzeb period, someone called as Chandravan Brahman, कि जिसका life was put into a brilliant biography by this historian called as Rajiv Kendra. So each of these nobles being worked on. There's a new one that would come in possibly next year, which would be on Shaista Khan, and which would talk about आपल्याला शाइस्ता खान लाल महाला म्हणणं 3 बोटं सोडून निघून गेला ह्याच्या पलीकडे माहीतच नाही. And Shaista Khan is so much one of the best generals of his time, one of the most erudite scholars of his time, a man who used to actually compose in something like Sanskrit. पण हितनं गेला म्हणून सांगितलं ना तुम्ही लय चाइल्डिश आहे, तुमचं काय नाही होऊ शकत. आपण इतके बालिश आहे की once you go through something like that, you start realizing as to what a horrible disservice has been done in terms of something called as Maratha history. ज्या बालिश, बाबोद आणि मूर्ख पद्धतीने त्याच्याकडे आतापर्यंत त्याचा विचार केला गेलेला आहे, उसका सानी नहीं, उसका कंपैरिजन ही नहीं है. As compared to that, this been turned into year upon year in terms of histories and biographies which are unbelievably superb, and which have a much larger reach on account of the fact that they get published in English, French, German, Dutch. काय करायचं तुमचं? काय नाही होऊ शकत आहे. काय म्हणजे काही पण नाही होऊ शकत तुमचं. सिरियसली स्पीकिंग, काही म्हणजे इट्स ट्रॅजिक अँड देयर इज नो वर्ड फॉर इट बियॉन्ड दॅट. पण असो, ट्रॅजिक तर नाही, आपल्याला काय करायचं. On one hand, as I said, is this idea that Dara is everything good as compared to Aurangzeb, that is everything wrong. And when you're looking at this, you're not trying to understand as to how was Dara looked in his own times. Scheming man, permanently holding some sort of an influence over his father. And most of the time that influence stemmed out of the fact that Dara never left the geographical proximity of his father. So permanently managed to keep himself as close to Shah Jahan, both at court and in the palace, as is possible. Behaved the obedient child. Was interested. But त्या अर्थाने म्हणजे if Dara is talking to Sufis and Jogis and is coming up with ideas about how is the world one and the same, everyone had that. Akbar had it. Even Babur, for that matter, is known to be a person who had confabulated on matters of religion and spirituality with no less a person than Guru Nanak. So Mughals, with the sort of background that they had in Central Asia, being from a family of people who had always been interested in matters of the world, were always known to be people who were very composite and very inclusive in terms of these types of approaches, curious, permanently curious about the world. So Dara कोई exceptional नहीं है. Dara एक ऐसी lineage का हिस्सा है जिसमें if you try turning back its pages and going back into time, you will come across a whole range of people who have done exactly the same things that Dara does. But for all his intellectual and academic pursuits, which are most of the time very spiritual in nature, he's a very ineffective sort of diplomat, an extremely poor military general and strategist. In a world where if you want to bid for empire, those are two big things that you would need. How diplomatic are you in terms of building alliances, and how good are you when it comes to being right in the forefront and fighting things out? और या दोन्ही केसेसमध्ये औरंगजेब आउटक्लासेस हिम इन प्रॅक्टिकली एव्हरी सिंगल डिपार्टमेंट. म्हणजे जी लोक तुम्हाला असं सांगतात की दारा खूपच महान माणूस होता आणि मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम इट इज इन द फॉर्म ऑफ जर दारा औरंगजेबच्या ऐवजी भारताचा राजा झाला असता तर सगळा टाइमपास त्याच्यावरती प्रिमाइज झाला नाही. आता पुढं काय करायचं, पण झाला असता तर मग हा प्रश्न पडतो कुणाला. अशा प्रकारचे स्पेक्युलेशन्स कुणाला करायचे वाटतात. And what is it that they are trying to do when they are trying to speculate on these types of things? And Dara is this case study for a whole range of things. I think last to last year you had Gopal Krishna Gandhi doing a small play on Dara. You have a similar range of plays which have been done across the border in Pakistan by a whole range of Lahore and Karachi liberals who also equally strongly believe in this, that the Mughal Empire would have had been a thing for better had Dara become the next emperor of India after Shah Jahan. सदिच्छा त्यांच्या जागी प्रॉब्लेम असा आहे, he doesn't have the skills to be a good emperor. त्याचा सगळा क्लेम काय आहे, त्याचा सगळा क्लेम इज द पप्पू क्लेम. My great-grandfather was prime minister, my father was prime minister, my grandmother was prime minister, my mother was de facto prime minister, so I should become the prime minister. किंवा हिलरी क्लिंटन. I have experience of government because my husband was president for 8 years. I was in the White House. I have been a senator. I have been a foreign minister. So and I would become America's first woman president, vote for me. दारा हिलरी क्लिंटन आणि पप्पू ह्याच्या पलीकडे काही नाही. And in a world which is intensely competitive, that doesn't work. Achha, the Mughals, like all great Central Asians, do not have a European idea of settled kingship. Each legitimate male child of the sovereign is equally entitled to become a king. We don't have a Western idea. आपल्या डोक्यात तिची काय वेस्टर्न आयडिया इतकी घट्ट बसलेली आहे. मग हा झाल्याच्या नंतर आता कोणी जर राजा झालं पाहिजे, एल्डेस्ट सन. But there is not an idea of eldest son. There is an idea of any legitimate male child. Anyone can become the king. All are equally entitled. And every growing old sovereign has this problem on his hand, that if he is not able to curb the competitive aspirations of his children, वो एक दूसरे का सर तो फोड़ने ही वाले हैं, बट इन दैट होल प्रोसेस वो शायद मेरा भी सर फोड़ने वाले हैं. सो हाउ डू यू बैलेंस इट आउट? सो ईच वन ऑफ देम ट्राइज टू प्ले दैट की आपण काय करूया, आपण हे पार्टिशन करून टाकूयात. यू गो टू द वेस्ट, ही विल गो टू द ईस्ट, यू गो टू द नॉर्थ, ही विल गो टू द साउथ, विल पार्टिशन ऑफ द एम्पायर. म्हणजे कमीत कमी मी जिवंत असताना माझ्या डोक्याला त्रास देऊ नका. मी मेल्याच्या नंतर मग तुमच्यापैकी whoever can bid for power between yourselves would kill each other and become the sovereign emperor instead of me. And we strangely enough believe in this, की ते असं करतात for a simple reason, because A, they are Muslims, B, they are Mughals, C, they are people who belong to a different world altogether where all of this is possible. ते त्यांच्यामध्ये आई बापाच्या बाबत असलं काही प्रेम काही नसतं, आणि त्याच्यामुळे इन देअर वर्ल्ड थिंग्स लाईक दिस हॅपन. म्हटलं होय, आम्ही 1680 मध्ये रायगडवरती बसून हा विचार केलेला होता की बा जिंजीला जातोस का आणि ह्याला रायगडला राहू दे. मग आपण काय मुघल का मुसलमान होतो? आपण नव्हता विचार केला रायगडवरती बसून हा की थोरले महाराज जे आहेत हे जातील जिंजीला, जिंजी बँगलोर ऍक्सेस, आणि लहान मुलगा आहे ना 10 वर्षाचा, ह्याला राहू दे तिथंच, हा बनल रायगड मध्ये राहता. सो हाऊ डिड दॅट वर्क? हे याचा विचार करत असताना की दिस इज व्हॉट दे वर डुइंग, यू डोंट वांट टू थिंक अबाउट दिस कि आप लोग क्या कर रहे थे, आप लोगों को कौन सा एक्सजेंसी था. उनका ठीक था की ते टर्क्स आहेत, मुघल्स आहेत, नोमॅड्स आहेत, मुसलमान आहेत, आपण काय, मग आपण कसा विचार करत होतो. ज्याला आपण वारण्याच्या तहानी 1730 ला विभागून घेतलं की हे साताऱ्याला जाणार आणि कोल्हापूरला येणार, आपण काय करत होतो. तह वारणेला डिव्हिजन कशात तर सातारा आणि कोल्हापूर, आणि अम्बिशन्स ऑफ बीइंग अ वर्ल्ड पार. सगळ्यांच्याच घरी चुली ह्या मातीच्याच असतात, त्या कधी बदलत नाही. ओके, प्रॉब्लम इज फॉर एवरीथिंग आपकी बेस्ट विशेस उसके साथ. Dara can never become an emperor. He doesn't have it within him. As compared to that, micromanager, man permanently suspicious of everybody. में ना पोरांवर भरोसा आहे, ना मंत्र्यांवर भरोसा आहे, ना कुठल्याही दुसऱ्या माणसांवरती भरोसा आहे. Needs to poke his head and his mind into every single affair of state. Every day slept only for 3 hours of the day. 3 तास झोपायचा, फक्त 3 तास. आणि टीव्ही चॅनल्स नाहीयेत तरी पण 3 तास झोपतो. फेसबुक नाहीये, टीव्ही चॅनल्स नाहीयेत, लॅपटॉप नाहीये, तरी पण फक्त 3 तास आपण रोज झोपायचो. राहिलेले 21 तास जे आहेत ना, मॅटर्स ऑफ स्टेट, दिवसभर बसून तेवढं एकच काम. ही इज अ हार्ड वर्कर. He has enormous amount of capacity for that sort of hard work. He's not going to let go of it until and unless he doesn't get it under his control. And does everything. तो दारा नहीं करेगा इसमें से कुछ भी नहीं करेगा. Most importantly, Dara is not capable of what is called as building alliances. One thing which is never told to you and is never taken into consideration is at the Battle of Samugad in 1658, in which Dara would be finally defeated and his pura fate would be sealed for all times to come. Aurangzeb's strongest defenders and allies on the ground are the Rajputs. Aurangzeb's classical case is the Mansabdari witnesses optimum expansion during Aurangzeb's period. You will never have a Mansabdari as bigger as this. A court noble order is जो इससे बड़ा होगा. 31% of Mughal Mansabdars under Aurangzeb are people who are not Muslims. They come from different Hindu communities, but 31% of them are Hindus. And this is the highest. As compared to that, under Emperor Akbar, who is supposed to be the paragon of a secular India, the Hindu Mansabdars measured only 20% of the total court. And was a far smaller elite in terms of its numbers as you compare it with what the Aurangzeb one was. 30% मनसबदार हे हिंदू आहेत. आम्ही रायगडवरनं गेलो त्याच्यासाठी होतो. सगळ्यांना देते तर आम्हाला पण द्या. म्हणून आमचा प्रॉब्लेम असा होता की आम्हाला आमचा आकडा चुकला. आम्ही तिथं जाऊन 10,000ची मागितली. तो म्हटला 10,000 मिळणार नाही. 10,000 कुठल्याही स्थितीत मिळणार नाही. For everything that you are capable of, and he knows well. He has fought in the Deccan. He knows Deccan politics very closely. Not all that I can concede to you is a Panchadari Mansabdar. मग आम्ही चिडलो. आम्ही सांगितलं Panchadari, are you mad? And that's how Sambhaji ended up becoming a Mughal Mansabdar, a Panchadari Mughal Mansabdar. Shivaji's son. And Shivaji could never get a Mansabdari and had to leave the court extremely bad, in a bad condition, wherein both sides were extremely angry at each other. And Shivaji's interest in the Mansabdari was precisely because of the fact की आपलं जे कुटुंब आहे ह्याच्यामध्ये आपले जे चुलते आहेत, आपले जे इतर भाईबंद आहेत हे मुघल मनसबदार आहेत. शाहिस्ता खान पुण्याला असताना ज्याला आग्र्यावरून पुण्याला येतो ना, यू काउंट आउट द टोटल भोसलेज इन द एंट्राउज and each one of them is a मुघल मनसबदार. आमचा बेसिक राग तो आहे. यांना मनसबदार केले हे सगळ्या काही नसताना माच करत फिरतात फॉर अ सिंपल रिझन, कारण हे मनसबदार. सो आपल्याला पण स्टेटस पाहिजे. पण हे नाही सांगत की आपण आग्र्याला गेलो कशाला होतो, आपण नेगोशिएट काय करत होतो, आपले नेगोशिएशन एक्झॅक्टली कुठल्या पॉइंटला फिसकटले, काय जमलं नाही, मग आपण निघून कसे आलो. And for all this lovely division between a Hindu-Muslim sort of a rivalry, Shivaji's Agra upkeepers and maintainers were Rajputs coming from Jaipur, who people who kept him in this house arrest, defended him, kept a watch on him. And that's the reason why in 1680, when Aurangzeb will come to the Deccan, in 1689 when Sambhaji would be killed here, the reason why Sambhaji would be killed is precisely because being a Mughal Mansabdar, he has turned out to be a traitor to the cause of the emperor. Jayala, Aurangzeb's third son, Akbar, rebels against him, decides to get along with the Rajputs to throw away Aurangzeb from the Agra throne. And the entire conspiracy is so brilliantly upturned by Aurangzeb by exchanging letters in such a brilliant manner. And this is what Aurangzeb was capable of. So तो एक सेट ऑफ पत्र राजपुतांना पाठवतो आणि त्यांना पाठवलेलं पत्र अकबरला मिळेल याची तरतूद करतो. एक अकबरसाठी लिहितो आणि ते राजपुतांना पाठवतो. Thereby both parties come to distrust each other. Left with no option, Akbar escapes to the Deccan and is put up by Sambhaji. The prime reason for which Sambhaji is ultimately punished. Prime reason. Despite being a Mansabdar of an emperor who is already in power, you are supporting an upstart. You are supporting somebody who is challenging the throne. There is nothing Hindu or Muslim about this. Absolutely nothing. It's a complex world, a very very complex world. Reducing it to this simple binary of ये हिंदू है वो मुसलमान है, इसका फायदा ही नहीं है, क्योंकि ये टर्म्स ही नहीं है कि जिसके ऊपर पूरा खेल खेला जा रहा है या जिसके ऊपर पूरा खेल प्रेमाइज्ड है. हाँ, आपका जो मॉडर्न डेवलपमेंट है in terms of the post-colonial development, in terms of a sense of identity, that works around this pole of something called as Hindu and Muslim. And it's this modern identity which you are seeking a validation for by looking at the past 300 years ago. And you are not going to get it because it's a very complex and a very different world altogether. So to reduce this through a prism, to try understanding as to did Aurangzeb have a Hindu policy which was similar to what ISIS has, the answer is no. Simply no. There are 15 temples which would be destroyed during this period in Par. 15 shrines all over the place. Okay. He would go about placing into position something called as a jizya in 1679. Almost something like 100-150 years after it was rescinded and revoked by Akbar. So jizya को फिर से reimpose किया जाएगा, and this would be seen as a way by which he is trying to reduce and trying to destroy the Hindus. And there is a lot of emphasis on this कि jizya gathering च्या ज्या औरंगजेबच्या orders आहे, they employ the language of the Shariat, they employ a certain sort of religious terminology, and there are in the set of instructions which have been passed on to the tax collectors that this is the way by which you should receive the jizya. One of the most important things which has been underscored in all of them is they have to be humiliated while they are paying it. And this is likely seen in that scenario, you are essentially talking about a king who is doing this to everyone who is not a Muslim. But I have time and again sort of kept on emphasizing on this. The world when Aurangzeb was alive is a very fluid place. You can keep on moving in and out. State का permanent problem ये है, अगर आपका जो humiliation का pattern है वो अगर unbearable हो गया, they are going to cease being Hindus and become Muslims. After which the state cannot collect that money from them. Now the problem is, if you increase its burden to a level where it becomes unbearable, they are going to give up on it. You don't have a census report which is kept which says that we record you in terms of Hindu. There are no reservations for anyone. त्याच्यामुळे तुमची कास्ट, कम्युनिटी आणि रिलिजन हिला स्टेटच्या लेखी काही महत्त्व नाहीये. उद्या जर का त्यांनी ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ दिस की यू आर बिकमिंग अनबेरेबल डिसाइड टू लीव दिस एंड बिकम मुस्लिम्स, द स्टेट का प्रॉब्लम ये है कि द स्टेट स्टैंड्स टू लूज दैट रेवेन्यू. द स्टेट हैज नो इंसेंटिव इन टर्म्स ऑफ टर्निंग यू इनटू मुस्लिम्स. तो फिर हाउ डू यू अंडरस्टैंड वॉट एवर इज बीन हैपनिंग? तो यू गॉट टू अंडरस्टैंड इट इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द टाइम्स. जो रॉयल ऑर्डर इशू किया गया है वो अपनी जगह पे है. सोचना ये है कि इस रॉयल ऑर्डर को प्रोमलगेट करने के बाद इसको इंप्लीमेंट किस तरह से किया गया है. इंप्लीमेंटेशन इज ओवर अ वाइडर ज्योग्राफी. देयर आर नो एस्टैब्लिश्ड प्रैक्टिसेस इन टर्म्स ऑफ स्टैंडर्ड ऑपरेटिंग प्रोसीजर्स. पीपल इंप्लीमेंट इंपीरियल फरमान्स डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट सूट्स देम एंड व्हाट डजंट सूट देम. And of course, I am not even talking of that other thing in terms of Aurangzeb issuing farmans for the maintenance and upkeep of temples and shrines. Aurangzeb issuing farmans in terms of nominating jagis as far as jogis, gosais, different types of mathadipatis of these different Jain mats and all of that is concerned. We are not even referring to anything of that. जो कि ये सब कुछ किया है. He maintains temples as far as Assam. So Aurangzeb issuing land grants to temples, you have Aurangzeb issuing restoration grants, maintenance grants to temples across the geography. So Dashi 15 have been destroyed, Dashi there have been endless number of them which have been appointed. And there have been new appointments which have been made when he was emperor. So ek to is a set of appointments which continues because you have inherited it from the past. There's a new set of appointments which have been made when you have become emperor. And the Rajputs never leave him, never, till the very end they don't leave him. It would only be after Aurangzeb is gone, sometime in the early part of the 18th century, when once it starts becoming clearer that the next emperors at Delhi are nothing more than the papus of the world in terms of their interest in something called as power. That's the time when the Rajputs are going to start moving away and establishing their own kingdoms, building up on their own estates. शेवटपर्यंत लोक सोडून गेलेली नाहीये. So how does one understand this? So त्याच्यासाठी what you have got to understand is, how is this word Hindu used? What does that word Hindu exactly mean? It's a Persian term. Interestingly, the Rajputs are considered Hindus, but the Marathas are not. The Marathas are seen as Marathas, Dakhinis, but they are never brought under the purview of this term called as Hindus. That should also explain as to why are people at Raigad so dead insistent on proving a connection with the north in terms of two things. One, their own biological lineages. Two, a ritual lineage which will take you to Varanasi. So आम्हाला रायगडला बसून एवढा इंटरेस्ट काय in terms of going north? And there's a movement towards the north. It's clearly discernible. It's only much later on, and of course there's one part of Shivaji, nobody wants to deny that, when Shivaji is pitching for a strong position as far as the Deccanis are concerned against what are called as the Hindustanis. So Shivaji sort of pitches his struggle once it becomes clear that Aurangzeb is deeply interested in finishing off the Bijapur and the Golconda kings as something that is we the Deccanis against they the Hindustanis. आणि आपण कसं एक कॉमन अलायन्स बिल्ट अप करणं गरजेचं आहे अगेन्स्ट देम. इट्स ओनली देन दॅट वी वुड बी इन अ पोझिशन टू प्रिवेल ओव्हर देम. We have a strong sense of sub-regional nationalism, but the only interesting problem is that sub-regional nationalism is not about anything called as Maharashtra. It is about what is called as we in the Deccan against them in the Hindustan regions. जो भी अभी डिस्टॉर्ट कर दिया गया है आपके लिए. We are told that he is a king only of the Marathi-speaking regions. When he is alive, he is talking a completely different language altogether. आ रहा है समझ में? So एक तरफ प्रॉब्लम ये है कि we are not able, and सगळ्यात मेजर क्राइसिस काय असतो, especially in terms of times which do not immediately gel with your times, you have got to have a lot of imagination when you are looking at the past. And if you don't have that imagination, sadly enough, if your imagination is trained in a manner where it can't be like free fielding, moving across a whole range of times and spaces, then you are always going to be at a loss in terms of understanding as to माझी एक कल्पना आहे about how should the past look like. But when I deal with something like this, it isn't gelling up with that. So ever since this book has been published, you have the predictable sort of reviews which have been made of it. So one section of historians, especially from the left liberal gang, espousing something which says that a brilliant text all by itself, a great book, एकदम landmark, path-breaking, and the right-wing nationalist taking a call which says that she doesn't understand what she's talking about. तिला कळतच नाहीये ती काय बोलतीये ते. So एकदम predictable किस्म का चीज है, एकदम predictable. She is herself skeptical about what she is doing. So she is amply clear about this. Ki you have got to be very clear about this. Ki the past is not the present. It's a different world altogether. And it depends on what is it that you need to be making a purchase of. पण सगळ्यात मोठा प्रॉब्लेम काय आहे? Is your imagination free or shackled? If your imagination is shackled to something, can it understand a world which doesn't gel well with your imagination? Can you use the criteria which you are using? When you want to talk of him as an Indian emperor, he is not an Indian emperor. He doesn't know of anything that you know of as India. So अगर आपका imagination shackled है, तो किस हद तक वो ऐसी चीजों को समझ सकता है कि जो आपके इमेजिनेशन के परे है? And is it at all possible that you would be in a position to do that? But the simple consequent question to this is, why should I do it? अगर मेरा पॉलिटिक्स इस बात पे डिपेंडेंट है कि I've got to foster a sense of हिंदू नॅशनलिझम, तो त्या केसमध्ये मी या माणसाकडं मुसलमान याच्या पलीकडं दुसऱ्या कुठल्याही लेन्सनी का म्हणून पाहायचं? Why should I look at him as anything beyond being a Muslim king? So at the end of the day, it's a question of how free or how shackled is your imagination. They can do this coming from the West for a simple reason, because they don't have any stakes in this कि जो immediate है. You come from a good Western university, the university pays you a luxuriant amount of money. You can afford coming in India, sitting, settling down over here, taking a look at a wide range of things, learning Indian languages, talking to people, and obviously people will talk back to you because you are European or American. आपण एकामेकांना त्या रिस्पेक्टनी किंवा त्या प्रॉक्सिमिटीनी कधीही गोष्टी समजावून सांगत नाही जेवढ्या प्रेमाने आपण एखाद्या माणसानी जो अमेरिकन किंवा युरोपियन असतो त्याला आपण समजावून सांगतो. We never do that to each other. With each other our sensibility is like एकदम तुसडेपणानी. पण असं आहे ना, युरोपियन किंवा अमेरिकन येऊ द्या, सगळं सगळं त्याला समजावून सांगतील सगळं. She can write a book, it can go across the world, make her name. And for Europeans like that, who are obsessed with the sort of post-war world that you have seen in Europe, ki jitha identity started becoming more rigid, got divided in a linear manner with no possibility of fragmentation or no possibility of fluidity, त्यांना गोष्टीचं भयानक अप्रूप असतं. He was a Mughal emperor when he was patronizing Sanskrit learning, when Sanskrit is the language of the Hindus. So how come he was doing that? So त्यांच्यासाठी ती एक भीषण गोष्ट आहे की how is that fluidity possible? So if he is a Muslim king, why is he not acting like a Muslim king? More for them these types of books are एकदम interesting. पण त्या अर्थाने she doesn't have an immediate stake over here ना. So त्या अर्थाने you are talking from a vantage position कि जो एक outsider वाला position है, जो एक reasonably objective किस्म का position है, क्योंकि आप यहाँ की जो हर दिन की political जद्दोजहद है उसमें आप शामिल ही नहीं हो, आपका शुमार ही नहीं है. और जिसका शुमार है उसके लिए वो बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग सवाल है ना. It was a different world, nobody is denying that. It will start becoming a remarkably similar world with the first what are called as the Hindu-Muslim riots happening sometime in the early part of the 18th century. And what a surprise there about Holi. पहिल्या रायटिंग्स आहेत ना, which would be characterized as Hindu-Muslim riots, what happened in 1714, 1716 in places like Surat, Ahmedabad, and they essentially play around that Holi wala theme. की होळीच्या निमित्ताने मिरवणूक काढलेली आहे. They are passing through our religious places, they are beating their drums, they are dousing us with color. Now the first complaints, the first reason of these riots, they are happening in the early part of the 18th century. What is very interesting is, while they are happening in places like Ahmedabad and in Surat, the Mughal emperor at Delhi, who is Muhammad Shah Rangila, is busy celebrating Holi in Delhi. Busy. म्हणजे महाराज दरवर्षी मोठी होळी साजरी करायचे, हत्तीवरनं रंग उडवायला जायचा गावभर. We'll get these tanks full of colored water and he'll roam all across the Shahjahanabad capital area, spraying everybody with color around him. So ये बात सही है कि आपके पहले जो known documented riots wherein the rioters are using that sort of a language against each other, are happening in the same period immediately after Aurangzeb is dead. But equally true is the fact that the emperor at Delhi is doing something that is completely different. मोहम्मद शाह तो इतना अजब किस्म का अलग आदमी है. Rules a substantive period 1719 to almost 1739. Rules a huge empire which is rapidly shrinking. But he is a man of a different sensibility altogether. How right is it? Like, I don't know how many of you have seen this BBC film called A Story of India, कि जिसका जो मुस्लिम इंडिया वाला हिस्सा है is largely a story of what is called as the Mughals in India. So एक जो अत्यंत महत्त्वाचा प्रश्न आहे ना, जो कायम विचारला गेलेला आहे, तो हा आहे की how right or wrong is it to perceive all of this through the lens of only political power. हा अमका राजा, तमका बादशाह, हे एकामेकाला असे वागवतात, हे एकामेकामध्ये असे वागतात. इज दॅट द राईट वे बाय विच यू कॅन अंडरस्टँड अ सोसायटी ऑफ इट्स टाइम्स? आता हे एकदम खरं है कि जितना इंफॉर्मेशन आपको राजाओं के बारे में मिलेगा, उसके कंपैरिजन में आपको बहुत कम इंफॉर्मेशन रैयत के बारे में, अबाउट द पुअर पीपल, अबाउट द कॉमन पीपल इन द किंगडम मिलेगा. द किंग्स आर वेल रिटन. Because the kings have made all efforts to see to it that they are well written. But as compared to that, what was a common man out on the streets doing? वो क्या खाता था, वो कैसे रहता था, वो एक दूसरे के साथ किस किस्म का बर्ताव करता था. Kings fought, kings did not get along with each other, but how did the common people get along with themselves? Were their relationships permanently premised on a sense of fragmentation and confrontation? And if that was the case, how did the empire go on for such a long period of time? Because at the end of the day, it has to gather its revenues. That's the only one way by which the show can be played. If the people do not agree with you, the people are not subscribed to what is called as I stay within your kingdom. So what were the common people doing? You get faint resonances, especially about the mercantile classes, the rich and the well-off, but you do not get much in terms of what is the average common individual doing on the ground. Of course, doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of thinking about them, because we are not talking about a democracy at all. So given the fact कि dominant system of government democracy नहीं है, इसलिए ये सवाल एक तरह से completely बेबुनियाद है कि common people कर क्या रहा था. वो कुछ भी करें, the state is not seeking its legitimacy within them. औरंगजेब का आग्रा कॅन्टोन्मेंट मध्ये कॅन्डिडेट नाही इलेक्शनला कुठलाही, की ज्याच्या बेसिसवरती मी राजा बनतो, असलं काही नाहीये. एकदा का आपण राजा झालो की त्याच्यानंतर आपण मरेपर्यंत राजा असतो, प्रोव्हाइडेड आपण चालताना याची काळजी घेतोय की आपल्या खाली काय आहे. मग चालताना ती काळजी घेतली नाही तर जीवाचा होमाही होतो. चालता चालता पडतं. He is someone who lives the longest. He died when he was almost 90 years of age. None of the other emperors had a life as big as that. म्हणजे till Aurangzeb did not turn 90, Shah Jahan was the longest lived king of his dynasty. Once Aurangzeb turns 90, all that you can say is extremely careful in terms of life, living and surroundings around him. Very careful in terms of everything. पडलंच नाही का स्वर्ण? Just on that count, one would say he deserves his kingship. Very interesting in terms of that. Those are the types of questions which need to be raised. Those are the types of questions that seek an answer. And those are the types of questions which are never answered and asked in our case. How did the king live? What did the king feel about the world around him? There's a very interesting letter which Aurangzeb has written to one of his sons He keeps on writing letters, endless number of letters. अगदी मरेपर्यंत पत्र लिहिलेली. The last letters are full of a sense of despondency, full of a sense of a life gone waste. And they're so remarkably poetic in their own nature, though they are written in prose. साहेबांना वयाच्या 90व्या वर्षी या गोष्टीचा सेन्स यायला लागलेला आहे की एव्हरीथिंग इज गॉन, कुछ भी नहीं बचा है. And time and again keeps on talking about this कि my life was a waste. I don't know what is it that I have achieved out of this. I feel I have sinned against things. Though a man who was completely pious throughout his life. Impending death का एक सेंस है, बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग सेंस है कि like you are never going to go away with anything that you have actually won throughout your life. One of those best things which is going to title the entire book, I come a stranger, I leave a stranger. This for a man who lived a life full within a family, within a court which looked admiringly up to him. कोई भी फेसबुक वाला तन्हाई का मामला नहीं है, पर फिर भी ये सेंस है, आई कम अ स्ट्रेंजर एंड आई लीव अ स्ट्रेंजर. इट्स रिमार्केबल, सिंपली रिमार्केबल. एक बहुत स्ट्रॉंग सूफियाना सेंस है. दैट्स द रीजन व्हाई ही वाज वेरी क्लियर अबाउट दिस. जगात कुठं जरी मेलो ना तरी पण आय विल बी ब्रॉट टू खुलताबाद एंड बuried over here. So he is not dead in खुलताबाद, he is buried in खुलताबाद. He is dead in नगर. वो नगर में मरता है, उसको खुलताबाद लाके गाड़ दिया जाता है. द सेंस की कधी पण त्या अर्थाने ही इज अ स्ट्रॉंग obnoxious thing as far as ISIS and the Al-Qaeda or the Taliban of the world are concerned. He is an extremely superstitious man. Living in the world in which they did, very, very superstitious. There are times when he actually consults astrologers for everything. And it's not seen as wrong. The Al-Qaeda will laugh in your face if you tell him that what I'm doing is I'm consulting an astrologer. मग ते आज ॲस्ट्रोलॉजर म्हटला म्हणून मी हे खडे अंगात घालून फिरतोय. मग अल-कायदा जिवंत असती ना त्याच्या टायमाला त्यांनी लय हाणला. भीषण सुपरस्टिशियस आहे, भीषण. पण दॅट्स द क्वालिटी ऑफ द टाइम्स इन विच यू आर लिव्हिंग. देयर आर कम्प्लीटली डिफरंट टाइम ऑल टुगेदर. May regularly you keep consulting the different types of panchangs. You have people at court who help you to do that. This is the right and auspicious time to start an event, bring it to a close. There's nothing Islamic about this. Absolutely nothing Islamic. And this is an Islam of convenience. जिथं suitable आहे तिथं he'll talk the Sharia का language. जिधर suitable नहीं है तिथं he is going to assert the state. Age old Alauddin problem. I don't understand what the Sharia says. I understand what is important from the imperial point of view. So जो suits with imperial interest वो किया जाएगा, भले ही वो शरिया में बैठे ना बैठे, हमें उससे कोई लेना देना नहीं. पण म्हणूनच कदाचित तो प्रॉब्लेम आहे की जो आयुष्याच्या शेवटी येतो की कदाचित आपण ना आपल्या आयुष्यामध्ये बऱ्याच अशा गोष्टी आहेत की ज्या बरोबर नाही केलेल्या आणि आपण नव्हत्या करायला पाहिजे पण आपण केलेल्या आहेत. रिमार्केबल, एकदम रिमार्केबल पर्सन. ऑल दैट यू कैन डू इज यू कैन एक्सप्लेन इट, यू कैन इवैल्यूएट इट. उस इवैल्यूएशन का क्राइटेरिया जो है वो आपका क्राइटेरिया परमानेंटली आपके हिसाब से काम करेगा, वो उसके हिसाब से कभी काम नहीं करेगा. Evaluation is always going to fall flat for a simple reason, because you're going to devise criteria which don't gel up with the times in which he finds himself. परत राहून प्रश्न तिथे येतोच, मग करायचं काय त्याचं? त्यांनी तर तुम्हाला काहीच करू नका असं सांगितलेलं आहे. प्रॉब्लेम तुमचा आहे की यू कॅनॉट इमॅजिन अ पॉलिटिक्स बियॉन्ड हिम. यू कॅन्ट इमॅजिन अ सेन्स ऑफ आयडेंटिटी अँड अ सेन्स ऑफ मोबिलायझेशन फॉर युअर पॉलिटिक्स बियॉन्ड हिम. ही इज अ कॉम्प्लिकेटेड क्रीचर. ही इज नॉट गोइंग टू लीव यू इन ईज. ये पूरा जो सन वाला आइडिया है ना पीछे का, द Al-Qaeda and the Taliban is never going to accept that sort of an idea. Never. ये पूरा सन वन not at all, completely unacceptable है. when he's comfortable with it. So is Aurangzeb's India a precursor of a certain sort of an ISIS? The answer is no. Then why is that sort of thing located in his past? For a simple reason, because it in a certain way facilitates the politics in the present. For people who try to seek Madar Shikoh, who would be an alternative to Aurangzeb, refuse to look history in the eye in terms of accepting what has been. And म्हणून time and again you have to take recourse to what is called as a certain sort of literary activity in the form of theatre, in the form of storytelling. And theatre तर त्याच्या बाबतीत नवीन नाही आहे. Its first play was written way back in 1675. When the English poet John Dryden went about writing a play in English called as Aurangzeb, 1675 में लिखा गया है. Of course, त्याच्यात येणारा Aurangzeb looks more like a Turkish emperor rather than an Indian emperor. So he carries all the known English sensibilities. जितना भी इंग्लैंड को टर्की मालूम है ना, उतना वाला औरंगजेब उस पूरे प्ले में आता है. It's a tragedy which has been written. It's considered Dryden's finest play. Aurangzeb had an English play written to him during his own lifetime. 1675 में लिखा, 1676 में पहली बार लंडन में प्रेझेंट किया गया. आपलं काय चाललं होतं विचार करा. तर आपण 1675ला दख्खन दिग्विजयावरती गेलेलो होतो. आणि ज्याच्यामध्ये पण आपण सगळ्यात महत्त्वाची गोष्ट जी करायला गेलो व्यंकूला हाणायचे आहे. तंजावरी जाणे आहे आणि व्यंकूला धुणे आहे. व्यंकू गेला रात्रीतनं पळून. 1675. So I don't know, how do you look at this? I just don't know as to what do you make of him. You're trying to use him for your political mobilization, but it doesn't work well. Liberals across South Asia do it in terms of trying to prove that Aurangzeb is चुकलं, खूपच चुकलं त्याचं. तसा बरा माणूस होता. But never put it into those larger frames of economy, technology, society, in terms of assessing as to what is the sort of burden that you want him to carry and is he capable of doing that. Acha, most of modern Muslim politics in South Asia has got nothing to do with him. The Muslim League never ever tagged on to Aurangzeb so long as Jinnah was alive. Jinnah never ever wrote a single word on this in terms of trying to understand ki there is a school of understanding Islam in South Asia, especially the formation of Pakistan, in terms of taking it back to Aurangzeb. Post-establishment of Pakistan on the 14th of August 1947, there was an effort made to project Aurangzeb as some sort of absolutely important link in this entire establishment of an Islamic state in South Asia. When Jinnah had got nothing to do with it. Jinnah was never interested in it. For a simple reason, because इतना complicated मामला है कि वो easily resolve नहीं होता है. हाँ, एक polemic के तौर पे हमेशा इस्तेमाल किया गया है. So the Pakistani state has always used it in a certain way to assert the fact that at some point of time or the other, आज जो दिल्ली और आगरा हमारे कंट्रोल में नहीं है, तो आगे जाके ये हमारे कंट्रोल में आए, इसके लिए एक पॉलिटिकल ईडियम के तौर पे डेफिनेटली यूज किया गया है. पर इक्वली अनकंफर्टेबल है, इक्वली प्रॉब्लमैटिक है. Because for them that permanent problem is how do you deal with the Rajput baggage that he comes with. You can't dispose that off. Most of his achievements are on account of those Rajput nobles. आणि तो आला ना की तो त्यांना घेऊन येणार. So they want Aurangzeb which would be shorn of that Rajput complete taint, connection. But you can't do that. For a simple reason, because he does carry a fair amount of Rajput blood in his veins. You can't see that off. One of the safest idea was keep him away. He becomes a great hero only after the establishment of the state for a certain sort of political expression in Pakistan which craves Indian territory. तो वो वाला expression जो है ना वो definitely जाएगा वापस उसके पास. पर ये Muslim League in its best form in 1906 to 1947 never was bothered about him, never. It's Pakistan after 47 which is interested in him. And Taripan knows for sure कि is not much that you can buy from him. आने समझ में. So एक extremely complicated किस्म का legacy है. History works in a way in terms of consolidating a certain sort of political sensibility in the present for which you need to go back to the past. But most of the time when you're going back to it, the one thing which you have got to be very clear about is to what extent can you bring it into your present with all the complications and connections of the past. कहाँ तक हो सकता है, किस पॉइंट के आगे उसको छोड़ देना पड़ेगा. As I said, you can explain, you can't evaluate. And beyond a point, though, evaluation becomes a game which is extremely dangerous. It's never going to give you anything for that matter of fact. आम्ही भारतामध्ये आणि से फॉर एक्झाम्पल डेक्कनमध्ये जवळजवळ आज 150 ते 200 वर्ष वी बीन प्लेइंग अराउंड विथ दिस आयडिया, पण नाही ना सक्सेसफुल होत. कसं करणार? सो ऑल दॅट आय कॅन से अँड सबमिट ॲट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, रीड द बुक. इट्स अ व्हेरी इंटरेस्टिंग वन, written in a language which is so simple, so unbelievably simple की त्याला काय अर्थच उरलेला नाही. म्हणजे आय एम नॉट यूज टू रीडिंग मुघल हिस्ट्रीज इन सो सिम्पलिस्टिक अ फॉर्म. म्हणजे तिला जर संधी दिली असती ना, तिने सिरियसली त्याची आम्हाला चित्रकथा केली असती. And I believe it doesn't work in that simple a manner. Obviously, as she said, since she is writing it for the Facebook and the Twitter crowd, she has got to adopt that simplicity. म्हणजे तुम्ही जर पानाचा आकार बघितला ना, लुक ॲट द फॉन्ट, यू लुक ॲट द पेज साइज, यू लुक ॲट द पेज का स्पेसिंग. आई एम नॉट यूज टू रीडिंग समथिंग लाइक दिस. When it comes to the Mughals, it has got to be something much more denser than this. पण तरी manages to pack everything into it, practically everything. आ रहा है समझ में? अब तुम लोग बोलो.